So what I wanted to ask you now really is exactly how anti-war is the US population, and what is the potential for people-powered movements to rein in the US political establishment, which seems hell-bent on this global war drive. So in terms of polling is very clear in terms of US voters, showing that there's a majority for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, and there's very strong disapproval of how the Biden administration has handled this issue. However, the polling over, say, the war on Ukraine is more ambiguous, with the US population divided on whether or not the US should be pouring more military aid into Ukraine in NATO's proxy war against Russia. So what is your assessment of US public's consciousness on these issues, and how do you seek to influence that with your campaign?
I think it's important to acknowledge that the level of propaganda that people have been exposed to has been here for decades. As long as capitalism has been in development in this country, there has been propaganda to safeguard capitalism. And one of the biggest propagandas have been precisely against China and Russia. And it's important for us to understand that. And so the boogeyman has always been Russia in this country, from USSR moments to now, even though Russia is a capitalist country. The US imperialists fear any other nation that could become as powerful as them. And they see that as a threat, not necessarily as a space to collaborate, right? Because ultimately the US imperialists seek to be in dominance of the rest of the world. And so it's more difficult to break through that propaganda because we have not seen what we have seen happen in Palestine in real time, as people are witnessing on social media. And a lot of the propaganda that was also imposed on us in terms of the Middle East, the Arab community, the Muslim community has been in so many ways dismantled in the last 12 months that people are desperately demanding an end to the genocide that is currently happening. So there is an opening. There is an opening to make the connections that are so necessary and that are real. The reality of US imperialism is that it necessitates war. It needs to be able to launch war against the world because it needs to maintain its hegemony. And war could be looked at in many different ways. There's hybrid war, right? There's lawfare, there's political intervention, there's the establishment of governments. All of these different things are part of war. It doesn't only have to be via genocide, as we are witnessing. And so I think that there's an opening, but there's so much political education that we need to be able to do, because ultimately there's always been an anti-war sentiment in this country. It's existed. And the cooptation of those movements is also real. And it happens in the political terrain. It happens with the promises of the Democratic Party primarily saying, we're going to stop this war from happening. We're going to end this. We're going to do that. And ultimately they co-opt the movement of the left, a grassroots movement, to get behind the Democrats during election year. And they continue to do the bombing. In 2008, it was Obama. There was a huge anti-war movement that was coming out of 2003, 2004. The anti-war movement with what was happening in Iraq, what then was happening and unfolding in Afghanistan. And he came in as that element from the Democratic Party that was supposed to give us peace. And he went on to bomb 8 different countries. And not only did he bomb 8 different countries, he also bailed out the banks during a moment where the majority of people in this country were suffering and losing their homes. And so the same thing is happening now. The Democratic Party did not say, we don't want Biden because he is collaborating in genocide. They did not say that. What they said was, we don't want the empire to seem weak facing Trump. Like, we want this to look at least like a fair fight. So we need somebody else to get on this. And so it's all very superficial in the ways in which things are dealt with in this country. There's very, very urgent need to be able to make the connections that are necessary for folks to be able to understand that what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in that part of the region is not very different from what's happening in the Middle East. Like, the interests are the same. They are there to safeguard US interests. They are there to expand US hegemony. They are there to solidify the control over regions. People need to be able to look into the history of Russia and that region as well, and the development of NATO. And why was NATO developed? I mean, at this point, it's irrelevant to even have such an instrument, right? Even from the capitalist logic. But it continues to be there because the next wars are going precisely to be against Russia and China. Therefore, they need to expand that instrument in that region. And that is an analysis that a lot of people miss because we don't have the history that's necessary to make that assessment.